Welcome back to the deep dive. Sometimes a simple piece of metal, a tiny, fragile creation from our corner of the cosmos, carries the weight of all human history.
It's an incredible thought, isn't it?
It really is. And today we are opening what must be the most ambitious and certainly the farthest flung time capsule ever conceived. We are embarking on a deep dive into the extraordinary story of the Voyager Golden Record.
It's more than just a time capsule, though. I mean, technically, it's a meticulously engineered 12-inch gold-plated copper phonograph record, launched back in 1977 aboard Voyager 1 and 2.
Right.
And it's designed to be humanity's ultimate cosmic bottle, our ambassador to any advanced intelligence that might intercept the spacecraft. Maybe billions of years from now.
Billions. It speaks to a radical kind of optimism, doesn't it? Especially considering the moment it was created.
Absolutely.
Before Voyager, we had sent out signals mostly on the Pioneer probes. They carried those simple diagrams, the Pioneer plaques.
Basically astronomical ID tags.
Yeah, essentially asking a basic spatial question, where are we?
Exactly. And the shift with the Golden Record is just monumental. It represents a huge qualitative leap in ambition.
How so?
Well, the Golden Record isn't just a map. It's this rich multimedia portrait. You've got audio, images, science, music, all attempting to answer that fundamental philosophical question. Who are we?
That's a massive undertaking, trying to distill the entire story of civilization onto one disc.
Huge. And the stakes couldn't have been higher. I mean, this was a project meant to survive until the stars themselves changed, potentially.
Right, but what often gets lost in the wonder of it all is the impossible timeline they were working under.
Oh, definitely.
This wasn't some decade-long committee project leisurely debated. NASA basically put Dr. Carl Sagan in charge, gave him a committee, and then a compressed, almost ludicrously short timeline.
6 weeks.
6 weeks. That's it.
6 weeks. To curate an object meant to speak for all of Earth, potentially forever.
Wow. 6 weeks to select the definitive sounds and images of, 6,000 years of civilization? 4 billion years of biology?
Exactly. The identity of humanity was on the line. And they truly had to risk everything, their reputations, their time, the resources, to make those critical choices. That frantic, high-stakes pressure cooker environment really defined every single decision they made.
It's remarkable. And Sagan and the committee, they understood the paradox right away, didn't they? The chance of the record actually being found by an alien intelligence is, it's infinitesimally small.
Yep, vanishingly small, yeah.
So if the external audience was statistically negligible, what was the real point? Why go through all that effort?
Well, Sagan always articulated the project's dual purpose. He knew that the very act of sitting down and asking, okay, if you had to choose one artifact to represent our entire species, what would it be? Forces this kind of collective moment of introspection.
I see.
He argued that just launching this message, this bottle into the cosmic ocean, said something very hopeful about life on this planet. So the record's truest, most certain audience, he believed, was actually humanity itself.
So it's an act of self-definition projected outward.
Precisely.
And to pull off that kind of self-definition in just 42 days, that required an intensely specialized and interdisciplinary team. It wasn't just Carl Sagan, the chief voice, but a whole collection of brilliant minds working flat out.
Absolutely. You had Andrian as the creative director, bringing the heart and soul, and ultimately providing arguably the most intimate data on the whole record.
We'll definitely get to that.
Yeah. And Frank Drake, famous for the Drake equation, he was the technical director. He handled all the complex astrophysical coordinates, the pulsar map.
Right.
Timothy Ferris was the producer, kind of wrangling all the musical and sound permissions, which was a nightmare in itself. John Lomberg was the key designer, tasked with making that cover a truly universal manual.
And Linda Saltzman-Sagan.
She had the diplomatic nightmare of organizing 55 distinct global greetings in 6 weeks.
Just, wow. A small team, an impossible mission, all compressed into 6 frantic weeks. It really sets the scene for the artifact itself.
Okay, let's dive into the physical object itself then, because the message really begins with the medium, doesn't it? It absolutely does.
This 12-inch disc, it isn't vinyl like a regular LP. It's a gold-plated copper disc. Why that specific choice? What's the thinking there?
Well, the material choice speaks directly to that billion-year survival requirement you mentioned. Standard vinyl would just degrade out there.
How so?
It would outgas in the vacuum, and it would be eroded pretty quickly by cosmic rays, all the high-energy particles, and the constant bombardment of micrometeorite dust in deep space.
Okay, so copper is more robust?
Copper is robust, yes, but the key is the plating. It's plated in ultra-pure gold. Gold provides superior resistance to all those elements. It's incredibly non-reactive, very stable.
So it's like the ultimate protective coating.
Exactly, designed for a lifespan measured in, geological or even galactic epochs,
Right.
not just decades or centuries.
But here's the major technical gamble, and frankly, the most fascinating choice for me. The analog gambit. This was 1977. Digital data existed. Magnetic tape existed.
It did. Reel-to-reel digital recording was around.
So why did they intentionally reject it and opt instead for a 12-inch analog phonograph format? To an alien civilization, wouldn't digital seem cleaner, maybe more efficient?
It's the ultimate vote for fundamental physical laws over, let's say, temporary technological standards. The key point here is this. Analog data is physically etched into grooves.
Right.
The variations in depth and width within those grooves are the data. So an advanced being, even one totally unfamiliar with turntables or electromagnetic recording, could theoretically examine those grooves. Maybe with a scanning probe or a high-powered microscope, something like that. They could geometrically reconstruct the sound wave or the image data just from the physical shape. It's a mechanical system, potentially universally readable if you understand basic physics.
So the data is literally embedded in the topography, the shape of the disk itself. What makes digital so much riskier by comparison in that context?
Well, digital data is fundamentally ephemeral, isn't it? It relies on abstract codes, specific compression algorithms, file formats, and highly specific reading mechanisms.
Like needing the right software or hardware.
Exactly. If you picked up an old 8-track cassette today, you'd need an 8-track player. If you found a floppy disk from the 80s, good luck reading it without the right drive and operating system.
Right.
Now imagine that problem scaled up across maybe 40,000 years and a massive cultural and technological gap. Digital becomes like a lock without a key. Analog, though, offers superior robustness because the key is physical reconstruction based on physics, which, we have to assume is universal.
That makes sense. But choosing that robust analog approach meant sacrificing speed, right? It was designed to play at $16 frac2 revolutions per minute. That's really slow compared to a standard 33 RPM LP.
It is slow, yeah.
Yeah.
It's the necessary trade-off. That slow speed was calibrated precisely to maximize the data payload. It allowed them to squeeze about 90 minutes of audio and 115 images onto the two sides of the disk. They needed every single bit of space they could get.
90 minutes total audio plus the images. That's pretty dense for analog.
Very dense.
And to really ensure the message wasn't lost in translation or lack of equipment, they recognized they couldn't just send the record out alone. They made it a self-contained package.
Absolutely. That was crucial. The finders might not have a turntable handy, obviously, or they might not understand how the groove system translates sound waves into physical bumps.
So what did they include?
Attached to the spacecraft itself, there was an accompanying package, and it contained the literal playback equipment, a specialized phonograph cartridge, and a needle.
A needle, like a stylus.
Yeah, a stylus made of diamond, actually. Chosen, again, for its durability and hardness to ensure it could survive the harsh environment and still read the grooves properly after potentially eons.
So they sent the message and the player and instructions on the cover.
They sent the message, the manual on the cover, and the machine itself. Everything needed, assuming a certain level of technological competence.
Which brings us neatly to that outer shield, the gold-plated aluminum jacket that protected the record itself. This jacket isn't just protective plating. It's the true Rosetta Stone, isn't it?
Absolutely. If the record itself is the book, the jacket is the grammar, the syntax, the dictionary, everything you need to even start reading.
It's arguably the most concentrated, brilliant piece of information design ever created.
I think you could make that case. It had to communicate the most complex ideas, time, space, geometry, physics, assuming the recipient had zero shared culture, zero shared history, only a shared understanding of fundamental physical constants. That's a heck of an assumption, but it's the only one you can make.
Okay, so let's try and unpack this interstellar manual. Where do you even begin? Well, with the most basic necessity, you need a universal definition of time.
Right, something not based on Earth's rotation or anything local. And for that, they turn to the most abundant element in the entire universe, hydrogen, which forms the basis for the universal clock diagram. That's the one on the bottom right of the cover.
That's the one. Correct. The diagram illustrates the hyperfine transition of the neutral hydrogen atom. This is a fundamental quantum mechanical process.
Explain that a bit, the hyperfine transition. Okay, so basically, both the electron and the proton in a hydrogen atom have a property called spin. They can spin in the same direction or opposite directions. The hyperfine transition is when the electron flips its spin relative to the proton, moving from a slightly higher energy state to a slightly lower one.
And this happens at a known rate.
It happens at an incredibly precise and crucially unchanging rate throughout the universe. This specific event defines the fundamental universal unit of time for the entire plaque, for the entire record cover.
And that time interval is specified right there in the diagram itself, using binary.
Yes, that single interval is $0.70 times 10 to the 9 seconds, or 0.70 billionths of a second. This unit, often called tau in discussions about the record, becomes the base constant. It essentially tells the finders every subsequent calculation, every frequency, every speed mentioned on this cover is relative to this intrinsic property of hydrogen.
It's the cosmic second hand.
A pretty good analogy, yeah.
Okay, so once they have this universal time unit, tau, they can move to the playback instructions. That's the diagram on the top left of the cover.
Correct. This is where the physics translates directly into, essentially, turntable geometry.
How does that work?
They show a top-down view of the record itself. And above that diagram, there's a formula expressed in binary arithmetic using the tau unit we just talked about. The whole goal here is to specify the record's correct rotation speed.
Using only physics and binary. So how does that binary translate into the $16 frac-Ju RPM speed?
The binary number, when decoded using the tau time unit, indicates that the total time required for one single rotation of the record should be 3.6 seconds.
Okay.
If you work that out, 3.6 seconds per rotation comes out to exactly 16.6666 rotations per minute, or the $16 frac-3 RPM we mentioned. So the finder civilization has a fundamental physics-based method to calculate the required rotational speed just from the diagram and the hydrogen atom.
That's ingenious. The diagram also shows where the stylus should start, right?
Yeah.
And the total playtime.
Yeah, it indicates the stylus starting position on the outer edge, moving inwards. And it implies the total playtime, which can be calculated from the number of grooves shown, amounting to roughly 1 hour per side. Remember, it's 90 minutes total audio across both sides.
It really is a masterclass in instructional design, assuming just physics. Anyway, moving over to the top right, we hit what looks like the most complex piece of technical instruction: the image decoding instructions for those 115 pictures stored on the record.
Yeah, this is critical because now they're taking analog audio waves. That's how the images are encoded, as waveforms, and they have to teach the finders how to reconstruct visual data from them.
How are images stored as audio?
Think of it like old analog television signals, or even fax machines. The image is scanned line by line, and the brightness variations along each line are translated into variations in an electrical signal, which is then recorded as an analog waveform in the grooves.
Okay, so the diagram shows them how to read that waveform.
Exactly. The diagram shows the typical waveform shape that signals the start of a picture. It gives the scan rate, how fast to scan across each line, which is about 8 milliseconds per line, again, noted in hydrogen time units, in tau. And crucially, it specifies the format of the image reconstruction.
And they specified a 512-line vertical raster format with something called an interlace method. That sounds incredibly specific. Why 512 lines, and what's this interlace method?
Well, 512 lines, 512 is a power of 2, 2 to the 9th power, which makes it computationally convenient even if you're doing it mechanically or with simple logic. It ensures enough vertical resolution to convey detail in the images without making the data size absolutely enormous for the analog grooves.
In the interlace.
Interlacing is a clever technical trick used for years in analog television broadcasting, actually. To save bandwidth, or in this case groove space and maybe decoding time, you don't transmit or store all 512 lines sequentially from top to bottom. Instead, you store the odd-numbered lines first, line 1, line 3, line 5, and so on, creating a sort of half-resolution image. Then you go back and fill in the even-numbered lines, line 2, line 4, line 6, in the gaps.
So the civilization decoding this gets a quick, maybe a rougher image first, and then the full detail fills in.
That's the idea. It's an ingenious way to manage the data density within the constraints of an analog groove system. It builds the image progressively.
Clever. But mistakes are likely in trying to decode this complex process for the first time. Do they include any kind of error-checking mechanism?
They did, a very simple but effective one, the calibration circle. This is essentially their hello world test for the image system.
How does that work?
The very first image encoded on the record, image #1, is just a perfect circle, simple geometry. So, if the alien finders decode the transmission for that first image, and the resulting picture they see is distorted, maybe it's squashed horizontally into an oval or stretched vertically, They immediately know their aspect ratio, their assumed horizontal to vertical scale, is incorrect.
So if you see an oval, you need to adjust your setup.
Exactly. They need to adjust their assumed scanning rate or timing until the oval becomes a perfect circle. Once they achieve that, they know they've calibrated their system correctly, guaranteeing the proper geometry for the remaining 114 images that follow. It's brilliant troubleshooting built in.
Okay, so once the decoding process for images is established, the final crucial piece of the cover tells the finders where this message came from and maybe when. That's the diagram on the bottom left, the famous "You Are Here" map, the pulsar diagram designed by Frank Drake.
This is the Galactic Address System. It's a map showing the location of our solar system relative to 14 known pulsars.
And pulsars are...
Pulsars are rapidly spinning, highly magnetized neutron stars. They're the collapsed cores of massive stars that went supernova. They emit these incredibly focused beams of electromagnetic radiation from their magnetic poles, kind of like a lighthouse beam sweeping around.
Okay. And why are they useful as landmarks?
Because they are remarkably stable cosmic clocks. The time interval between pulses for a given pulsar is incredibly regular, though it does slow down very gradually and predictably over millions or billions of years.
Got it. So those 14 lines radiating out from the center point, which represents our sun, are basically pointing towards the directions of these 14 specific pulsars.
Precisely. And the long binary numbers etched along each of those lines are crucial.
What do those binary numbers represent?
They represent the precise pulse periods of those 14 specific pulsars, measured down to a very high accuracy back in 1977 when the record was made. And importantly, these periods are given in terms of that fundamental hydrogen time unit, tau.
Okay, so the finders can identify the pulsars, measure their current pulse periods. How does that tell them when the record was launched?
Here's the genius part. Because pulsars slow down predictably over vast timescales, the finders can measure the current pulse rates of those 14 stars from their location. By comparing those current rates to the original 1977 rates encoded on the record in binary, they can calculate how much the pulsars have slowed down.
And that difference tells them how much time has elapsed.
Exactly. It allows them to calculate the time that has passed since the record was launched with potentially staggering precision, maybe within a few years or decades, even over millions of years. It's a dynamic, universal chronological marker. If you know the rate of change and you measure the current rate, you can figure out exactly how old the message is.
That's incredible. But relying only on pulsars, I mean, what if some of those stars have moved significantly over millions of years or maybe even collapsed or something? Did they include a failsafe?
They did. A very clever one. The backup clock. The inclusion of a tiny amount of uranium-238 on the cover itself.
Radioactive material.
No.
On the cover.
Yes, a very small quantity of ultra-pure uranium-238 was electroplated onto the aluminum jacket. U-238 is radioactive, as you know, and it has a remarkably long and very well understood half-life, about 4.51 billion years, roughly the age of the Earth itself.
And how does that function as a clock? Isn't radioactivity random?
The decay of an individual atom is random, yes. But over a large sample and long time scales, the overall decay rate is extremely predictable. As U-238 decays, it goes through a long chain of steps and eventually transforms into stable daughter isotopes, primarily lead-206.
Okay.
So, by measuring the ratio of the remaining U-238 atoms to the amount of the daughter isotope, like lead-206, present on that sample on the cover, the finders gain an independent nuclear physics-based method to calculate the time elapsed since the record was sealed and launched.
So if the pulsar binary numbers were somehow degraded by space dust, or maybe if the finder's understanding of pulsar dynamics was slightly different from ours, they still have this completely separate clock based on the immutable laws of nuclear decay.
That's the idea. Redundancy.
It's fascinating how the entire cover is this nested set of instructions. Hydrogen defines the basic time unit. That time unit defines the record's rotation speed. The rotation speed and timings define how to reconstruct the images. And then the pulsars and the uranium define the when and where of the whole message. It's a masterpiece of redundant, physics-based information architecture.
Absolutely. Designed to be decoded by intelligence, assuming only shared physics.
Okay, so moving from the physics on the cover into the grooves themselves, we transition from physics to culture. The audio portion begins with the voice of Earth, or at least the official voices of Earth, starting with these messages of formal diplomacy, but also carrying a dose of human fragility.
Yes, the very first sounds you hear are these foundational statements. They really established the context of our civilization back in 1977. The very first voice recorded belongs to Kurt Waldheim, who was the UN Secretary General at the time.
And he spoke on behalf of all the member states.
Yes, he explicitly mentioned speaking on behalf of the 147 member states of the United Nations back then. This was crucial for establishing the Golden Record, not just as an American project, but as a global, unified mission of peace.
And the message itself, what was the tone?
It used language that was both aspirational and, quite humble, acknowledging that our planet is just a small part of this immense universe and stating clearly that we seek only peace and friendship.
Setting a tone of hopeful global governance, perhaps.
Exactly. But that message is immediately followed, not by another voice, but by the powerful printed message included as one of the 116 images, the statement from the U.S. president at the time, Jimmy Carter.
Ah, yes. And this message, you can really feel the subtext of the Cold War context, can't you? The time under which the record was conceived and built.
Absolutely. It hangs heavy in the air, even reading it today.
And the line that just carries all that weight, the one everyone remembers is, "We are attempting to survive our time so we may live into yours."
Chilling, isn't it? That phrase is such a profound admission. The mid-1970s were thick with nuclear tension, environmental anxiety. Carter's statement transforms the record from just a simple greeting into this potential appeal for historical memory. It's almost like an arc.
An arc carrying the memory of our existence, just in case the human experiment failed in the short term.
That's how it feels. It basically says, look, we built this in a time of great peril, hoping that you, the future, whoever you are, will see that we valued survival and creativity and reaching out.
A heavy message to start with. Following those formal diplomatic statements, we then get the true chorus of humanity. The 55 spoken greetings, which were organized by Linda Salzman Sagan.
Yes, and the goal here wasn't just to tick boxes and list languages. It was an attempt to present what they called an oral gestalt, the unified yet incredibly complex sound of a single global community.
55 languages. The linguistic span must be staggering.
It really is. They deliberately reach way back into history, for instance, including Akkadian.
Akkadian?
Yes, a Semitic language that was spoken in ancient Sumer and Mesopotamia about 6,000 years ago. Including that was a way to demonstrate the deep historical roots of human civilization.
Wow. And then they brought it right up to modern dialects.
Absolutely. They included modern, diverse dialects from all over the world, like Wu, which is one of the major linguistic groups of Chinese, spoken around Shanghai. The sheer logistics of sourcing 55 distinct language speakers, getting recordings, verifying translations, all in 6 weeks.
Unbelievable. Where did they find them all?
A lot were pulled from the halls of Cornell University, where Sagan worked, and from the local communities around Ithaca, New York. Students, faculty, staff, locals. It speaks to that frantic pressure cooker again.
And the messages themselves, they aren't just hello, are they? They're quite varied and, well, charming. Little micro-portraits of different cultures.
They really are. The oldest message, the Akkadian one, is very succinct. May all be very well, a simple wish.
And others?
The Korean greeting is polite and standard. Hello, how are you? But some of the more modern ones show such distinct cultural preoccupations. The Amoy greeting, for example.
Amoy, that's Minnan Chinese.
Yes, a Chinese dialect mainly spoken in Fujian province in Taiwan. Their greeting is just wonderful. It asks, "Friends of space, how are you all? Have you eaten yet? Come visit us if you have time."
Have you eaten yet? That's such a common warm greeting in many Asian cultures.
Exactly. It connects this profound cosmic scale, friends of space, with the most basic, fundamental human need and act of fellowship, sharing food. It's an immediate, domestic, warm invitation.
Lovely.
And the Mandarin Chinese message is similar in tone, extending that invitation. Hope everyone's well. We are thinking about you all. Please come here to visit when you have time. Again, that openness.
And then, of course, the English greeting.
Delivered by Nick Sagan, Carl Sagan, and Linda Salzman Sagan's young son at the time. It's deliberately simple and innocent. Hello from the children of planet Earth.
It really presents the whole spectrum of human communication, doesn't it? From an ancient prayer to formal diplomatic overtures to these warm cultural invitations, right down to the voice of childhood innocence.
It's a beautiful tapestry of voice.
After those voices fade, we transition into the next major audio section, the 12-minute collage called The Sounds of Earth. And this isn't just random noise thrown together, it's structured, isn't it? A kind of non-verbal narrative.
Very much so. It's intentionally structured to tell a story logically, almost like a mini documentary in sound. It starts with the planet itself and moves progressively towards the technology that actually made the record's journey possible.
So where does it begin? With nature sounds.
Interestingly, it starts with the geophysical foundation, but not immediately with raw nature. It actually begins with a fascinating human interpretation of nature. Laurie Spiegel's electronic realization of Johannes Kepler's Harmonices Mundi, the harmony of the worlds.
Kepler's music of the spheres.
Kind of, yeah. Kepler tried to find mathematical harmonies in planetary motion. Spiegel's piece is an electronic interpretation of that idea. Starting with this sets a unique stage, suggesting that even our understanding of the cosmos and nature is often filtered through mathematics, science, and art.
Okay, and then after that introduction, we hear the planet's raw energy.
Yes. Then you get the primal soundscape of Earth, volcanoes erupting, thunder rolling, the sound of wind, rain, waves crashing on the shore.
Right.
The fundamental geological and meteorological forces.
And from the planet itself, the narrative then shifts into the biological sphere.
Exactly. We move from geology and weather into zoology. You hear crickets chirping, the croaking of frogs, a whole variety of birdsong representing different ecosystems, and then specific calls of larger animals like elephants, chimpanzees.
And the whales. The whale songs were a big deal, weren't they?
A very significant inclusion. The haunting, complex, and clearly intelligent songs of the humpback whales. Including them was a specific choice, championed by people like Dr. Roger Payne, recognizing them as perhaps the most sophisticated non-human intelligence we knew of on Earth. It was a statement about the value of other life.
So we've had the planet, the animals.
Yeah.
How is humanity introduced into the sound sequence, not through language this time, but through basic human biology?
Right. It starts with the most universal human actions and sounds. You hear footsteps, the rhythmic pulse of a human heartbeat, the sounds of a mother feeding and comforting a child, laughter, and the distinct sound of a kiss.
A kiss, really?
Yes, it's raw, universal biological humanity, culminating perhaps most famously in the sound of Carl Sagan's own laughter. A brief snippet, but it's there, an auditory signature of human joy and personality.
That's amazing. And the final act of the sound collage charts the technological arc. It moves chronologically, showing our development.
Precisely. It demonstrates our increasing mastery, or perhaps just use, of tools and energy. It starts conceptually with sounds representing the first tools, maybe stone striking stone, perhaps representing early flint knapping. Then it moves to a blacksmith hammering metal, illustrating the deliberate transformation of raw materials.
And the progression speeds up.
Yeah, then the sounds become more complex and powerful. A saw cutting wood, a shepherd herding animals. Then the industrial age kicks in with a steam train, Morse code transmissions signifying communication technology, the sound of an airplane representing flight.
And how does it end?
It ends with this incredibly powerful, self-referential sound. The colossal, unforgettable roar of the Saturn V rocket liftoff. The very rocket system that launched Apollo missions and whose descendants launched Voyager itself.
So the technology that launched the record becomes the final sound in the Earth collage.
Exactly. It's an acknowledgement of our own ingenuity, our ability to leave the planet. It completes the narrative loop. Here is our world. Here's the life on it. Here are our basic sounds. And this is how we managed to send this message to you. Okay, so after the greetings and the sounds of Earth collage, we get to the bulk of the audio content. The ultimate expression, perhaps, of human cultural diversity and emotion. Humanity's mixtape.
The music section. Around 90 minutes of music selected under that intense pressure, designed to somehow convey the entire spectrum of human feeling across vast cultural divides.
It's an impossible task, really. But that was the mandate.
And this was the major task for people like Timothy Ferris, the producer, but also consulting with experts like the ethnomusicologist Alan Lomax, and even, interestingly, the rock producer Jimmy Iovine, who was just starting his career.
A truly unusual blend of backgrounds for a curation committee. Science popularizers, deep folklorists, and emerging rock and roll figures. The goal, it seems, was definitely breadth over trying to find some single perfect representation, risking everything included, risking putting seemingly disparate things together.
And the resulting track list is, well, it's dizzyingly eclectic. Let's start with the Western classical side. What made the cut?
Some absolute towering achievements of the Western canon are there. You have 3 pieces by Johann Sebastian Bach, including the Brandenburg Concerto No. 2, first movement, and the Gavotte en Rondeau from the Partita No. 3 for violin. Bach represents, structure, Baroque genius, mathematical beauty in music.
What else from the classical world?
You have the sheer technical brilliance and drama of Mozart's Queen of the Night aria from the Magic Flute. Then the profound emotional depth of Beethoven, both the famous opening of the Fifth Symphony, representing fate knocking at the door, and the incredibly intimate cavatina from his late string quartet No. 13.
The cavatina. Sagan reportedly suggested that peace captures the loneliness and beauty of being human.
It does have that quality. And they also included the complex, almost jarring primal modernism of Stravinsky's The Rite of Spring, the sacrificial dance section. So a real sweep of Western classical music history.
But crucially, this high art is immediately contextualized, placed alongside a really stunning selection of non-Western and traditional music. This was clearly essential to ensure the record didn't just represent European culture.
Absolutely vital. And the selections here are fantastic. You see the world represented. We have the sophisticated, shimmering, rhythmic percussion of Javanese gamelan music from Indonesia plus Pewarna, which is less about Western melody and more about these complex, interlocking rhythmic and melodic structures.
What else from around the globe?
You hear Peruvian panpipes and a wedding song, showing folk traditions from South America. There's music from Senegal, representing West Africa, and the incredibly haunting, highly improvised emotional expression of Azerbaijani musam, performed on bagpipes in this case. That piece, Uzseir Hatchav's performance, speaks to these deep, ancient musical traditions of Central Asia.
The depth of Asian music is also really well represented, isn't it?
Absolutely. You have the serene, contemplative tones of the Chinese qin, which is a seven-string zither. The piece is called Liu Shui, or Flowing Streams, and it just conveys tranquility and connection with nature.
Beautiful.
And then the intricate complexity of classical Indian music, represented by a raga, Jat Kahan Ho, sung by Surshri Kizar by Karkar. This demonstrates the highly formalized yet deeply spiritual and improvisational nature of that tradition.
It's an incredible range, and then bringing it back closer to home for the launch context, the vital American contributions, which really represent the roots of so much global popular culture today.
Right. You have the essential voice of early jazz, with Louis Armstrong and his Hot Seven performing Melancholy Blues, which was actually mislabeled Melancholy on the record notes initially. This documents the birth of a uniquely American art form from the African-American experience, full of improvisation and blues feeling.
And speaking of blues, perhaps the most raw, spiritually profound piece on the entire record for many people.
You must mean Blind Willie Johnson's Dark Was the Night, Cold Was the Ground.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's just devastatingly beautiful. It's essentially wordless, just Johnson's incredibly expressive slide guitar work and his mournful humming vocalizations. It seems to convey a universal sense of solitude, sorrow, perhaps resilience. It's music that speaks directly to raw human emotion without needing any linguistic translation at all.
It feels like it taps into something incredibly deep, yet despite the inclusion of this incredible diversity, the selection process itself wasn't smooth sailing, was it? It was fraught with philosophical disagreements, these curatorial battles that truly define the project under pressure.
Oh, definitely. These weren't easy choices, especially not in 6 weeks.
The first major one we should talk about was the decision to include rock and roll.
Specifically, Chuck Berry's Johnny B. Goode.
Yeah, I mean, you can just imagine the meeting, right? You've got Bach, Beethoven, Javanese gamelan, Blind Willie Johnson, and then someone says, how about Chuck Berry? How did that debate play out in that pressure cooker?
Well, it seems to have been a real conflict between, let's say, cultural elitism or traditionalism and demographic reality. The renowned ethnomusicologist Alan Lomax, whose life's work was focused on preserving deep folk traditions from around the world, reportedly objected quite strongly.
On what grounds?
He apparently called rock music adolescent. He felt it lacked the structural complexity, the cultural depth, maybe the historical weight necessary to represent humanity's highest musical achievements to the cosmos.
Okay. And Sagan, known for his more democratic, maybe populist approach to science and culture.
Yeah.
How did he respond?
Sagan saw this as a fundamental issue of representation. His first retort, the line that settled the argument, was simply, there are a lot of adolescents on the planet.
Perfect.
Right, it's the ultimate justification for its inclusion. Rock and roll, and especially Chuck Berry's foundational, energetic piece, was the dominant popular culture for a huge segment of the world's population in 1977, particularly the young. To exclude it would have been to define humanity only by the culture of the elite, or the past, ignoring the vibrant, energetic majority experience of the present. Its inclusion was a victory for, you could say, cultural democracy, risking including the popular alongside the profound.
A great story. The second, and perhaps far more persistent controversy involves a famous omission, the Beatles. Specifically, their song, Here Comes the Sun.
Ah, yes, the great Beatles myth. This has become this powerful cultural legend, hasn't it? Almost a parable of how corporate bureaucracy or greed can defeat noble human endeavor.
Right. The popular narrative, the one you hear most often, suggests that Sagan and the committee desperately wanted the song. I mean, it seems like a perfect message of hope and renewal for a cosmic greeting card. But the record label, EMI, or sometimes the story says the Beatles themselves, or even John Lennon specifically, either refused the rights outright or demanded an extortionate fee.
Yeah, the figure often cited is $50,000, which was a lot of money in 1977, especially for a NASA project with a tight budget. The story goes that this effectively vetoed the selection.
So the myth is basically corporate power or maybe artistic ego stopped this beautiful piece of music from reaching the stars.
Precisely. It fits a nice narrative. However, the committee member who was most instrumental in the music selection process, Timothy Ferris, offered a pretty strong rebuttal to this story back in 2017.
What did Ferris say?
He claimed, quite firmly, that the song was actually never up for serious consideration. Not because they didn't like it, necessarily, but because, under that intense 6-week deadline, the sheer cost and complexity of securing international publishing rights across multiple markets for a Beatles song were just seen as insurmountable, even if they had wanted it badly. There simply wasn't time or budget infrastructure to chase it down.
Okay, so it was more about logistical impossibility under the deadline.
That's Ferris's primary point. But he went further, didn't he? He also sort of challenged the subjective quality or suitability of the selection itself.
How so?
Yeah, he argued, perhaps controversially, that Here Comes the Sun was not the Beatles' strongest work. Which is debatable, of course, but critically he felt its specific witticism seemed unlikely to translate or remain funny for 1 billion years.
That's a different angle.
It shifts the narrative, doesn't it? From a simple corporate tragedy to a much more complex, subjective, curatorial challenge. Even if they could have gotten the rights easily, would this specific pop song, with its particular cultural context and maybe subtle humor, truly be the best choice to define our species for geological time? It just illustrates the incredible burden of trying to make potentially immortal decisions under intense temporal pressure. What seems perfect now might seem trivial later.
That's a really good point. And if we're talking about philosophical gambles and potentially immortal decisions, we absolutely have to talk about perhaps the most intimate data included on the entire record. Something profoundly human, yet entirely nonverbal.
You mean the 1-minute audio track derived from Andrian's EEG?
Exactly. Electroencephalogram. Brainwaves.
This is truly the most radical inclusion, I think. It is literally an unedited, raw electrical signal recorded directly from a human brain while it was actively thinking and feeling.
Tell us the story behind that.
Andrian, who was the creative director of the project, spent an entire hour wired up to an EEG machine. And during that hour, she was instructed to meditate, to think deeply about specific things. The history of Earth, the challenges of civilization, the meaning of life. And critically, she later revealed, she also focused intensely on the extraordinary experience of falling in love.
Falling in love? With whom?
With Carl Sagan. They fell in love during the intense, high-pressure 6 weeks of producing the Golden Record. Their relationship blossomed right in the middle of this cosmic project.
Wow. So the sound encoded on the record is literally the electrical signature of her brain activity while contemplating the universe, civilization, and love.
Yes. A 1-minute excerpt of that hour-long recording is included on the record. It's the closest they could possibly come to sending not just information or art, but a fragment of human consciousness, of subjective experience itself.
It's an act of profound vulnerability, isn't it? And an incredible philosophical gamble.
It's the ultimate wager on the potential universality of consciousness, or at least the patterns associated with complex thought and emotion. If an alien species ever decodes this signal, and figuring out what it is would be a huge challenge in itself, they would be listening to the electrical signature of a human being, processing knowledge, feeling connection, contemplating history, and experiencing the profound emotion of love.
It's perhaps the only element of the entire record that doesn't rely on language or music or visual representation as we know it. It's just raw brain activity.
Exactly. It relies on the hope that emotion itself, the experience of profound connection and complex thought, might be a fundamental constant of intelligent life, recognizable even in its raw electrical form. It feels like the literal embodiment of President Carter's hope that the record would carry a token of our thoughts and our feelings, the most audacious piece of the entire message. Okay, so moving from the audacious auditory gambit of the EEG to the visual story, the 116 images included on the record aren't just a random slideshow either. They function as a very carefully constructed visual lesson plan designed to be decoded sequentially, building up a story of our world.
Right. They proceed logically, kind of building complexity step by step, much like the cover instructions. They start with pure science to try and establish a shared framework of understanding, right?
Exactly, you need common ground. So they start with the basics. The calibration circle we talked about, the solar system map showing our location within our star system. Then they move into fundamental math and physics diagrams showing things like vector addition, basic arithmetic, then chemistry diagrams of atomic structure, common elements, and crucially, the iconic double helix structure of DNA.
So the message is, we understand the fundamental laws of the universe, at least as we perceive them, and these laws underpin our existence and our biology.
That's the foundation. Then, the visual lesson plan moves logically into the life and biology segment. This is where they define the human species physically and biologically.
How do they approach that?
This section essentially charts biological reproduction in human anatomy. It includes diagrams showing cell division, then detailed anatomical drawings of the human body, skeletal, muscular, circulatory systems. Then it shows the process of conception, the development of a human fetus inside the womb, and culminates with photographs depicting the act of human birth.
So it's a complete, pretty unvarnished story of where we come from biologically. No hiding the basics.
Not at all. It's quite direct. And finally, having established the physics and the biology, the images expand outward to the broader context, the natural world and our culture, showing how we live on this planet and what we value.
This is where the cultural diversity comes in visually.
Yes, this is the largest section. You see iconic natural landmarks, photos of the Grand Tetons, Monument Valley, the Great Barrier Reef representing Earth's beauty. These are juxtaposed with great works of human architecture from different eras and cultures. The Taj Mahal in India, the Great Wall of China, the modern Sydney Opera House.
Showing our interaction with the planet and our creativity. But mostly it's pictures of people, right?
The majority are photographs of diverse human beings and their activities. You see portraits like the Bushman hunters from Botswana, Andean girls from Peru, people from Turkey, Guatemala, Ghana, Bali, representing global diversity. And crucially, you see social scenes. A family portrait, a bustling street scene in Pakistan, a Chinese dinner party, children in a classroom, people engaged in activities like cooking, fishing, farming, athletes competing, a violinist playing.
So they showcase our labor, our relationships, our learning, our art, our ability to cooperate and socialize.
Exactly. It tries to paint a picture of everyday human life in all its variety. This visual story, however, this was where the second major political battle occurred during that frantic 6 weeks. The nudity controversy.
Ah, yes. And this connects directly back to the problems they had with the Pioneer plaques, doesn't it? The committee was clearly aware of past political failures and the potential for backlash.
Acutely aware. The Pioneer 10 and 11 plaques, launched just a few years earlier in 72 and 73, had included those very simple line drawings of a nude man and woman, basically just anatomical representations.
And they caused quite a stir back then.
They provoked a significant and frankly rather absurd public backlash in the United States. Letters to NASA, criticism in the press. People were offended by sending nudity into space.
Hard to imagine now, maybe, but it was a real issue.
It was, and that backlash absolutely terrified NASA administrators. They were worried that the Voyager project, which is a much bigger, more expensive, higher-profile mission, would be compromised or even jeopardized by similar moral outrage, especially in the political climate of the time.
So NASA stepped in?
Yes. NASA headquarters issued a direct, non-negotiable directive to Carl Sagan and his committee. They were absolutely forbidden from including a photograph of a nude man and woman on the Golden Record. Full stop.
Okay, so no photographs of nudity. What was the initial compromise then?
The initial compromise, to satisfy NASA's political requirement, was to include a silhouette. Just a black outline showing the human form, male and female, but without any anatomical detail whatsoever. Vague suggestion, no specifics.
That seems inadequate if you're trying to represent humanity accurately.
The committee thought so too. They realized that they couldn't possibly send a message purporting to represent all of humanity to the cosmos without providing accurate anatomical data. A silhouette just wasn't enough. So they engineered a subtle but brilliant act of defiance.
Ooh, how did they manage to include anatomically correct nudity without directly breaking NASA's clear mandate against photographs?
They essentially laundered the images by rebranding them as purely scientific data, not as art or portraiture.
How did they do that?
They commissioned new, anatomically correct line drawings, not photographs of nude male and female figures, clearly showing external genitalia and secondary sexual characteristics. But, and this is the clever part, they didn't present these drawings as standalone portraits of Adam and Eve. Instead, they strategically placed them within a much larger, drier, more scientific-looking diagram illustrating vertebrate evolution.
Ah, so the nude human figures were just the final panel in a sequence that maybe started with a fish, then an amphibian, a reptile, a mammal.
Exactly. The diagram shows the evolutionary lineage, and the human figures appear simply as the current endpoint of that biological progression. By classifying the human anatomy diagrams as biological taxonomy, just the latest stage in vertebrate evolution, they completely neutralize the potential moral argument.
It wasn't pornography, it was pedagogy.
Precisely. It reframed the images as cold, hard science. It was a masterful piece of curatorial strategy, allowing them to include the essential biological data they felt was necessary, while technically adhering to NASA's ban on nude photographs and sidestepping the political landmines of 1977. Science, or at least clever presentation, winning out.
So the message is complete. Images and sound selected, controversies navigated, the whole thing sealed in gold and launched into the void. Now we track the phenomenal continuing reality of the longest journey ever undertaken by anything humanity has ever built. Let's get an update on the current voyage status. Where are Voyager 1 and 2 now, roughly, in late 2025?
Okay, well first, it's always worth remembering the slightly confusing launch sequence. Voyager 2 actually launched first, back in August 1977. But Voyager 1, launched a few weeks later in September 1977, was deliberately placed on a faster, more direct trajectory.
Why was that?
It was designed to take advantage of a rare planetary alignment, allowing it to get significant gravity assists from Jupiter and Saturn, slingshotting it outwards much faster than Voyager 2, which took a longer route to visit Uranus and Neptune as well.
Right. And after completing their primary missions, exploring the outer planets, which were stunning successes in themselves, they just kept going on the Voyager interstellar mission. When did they truly leave the sun's dominant influence, the heliosphere?
Defining that boundary is actually complex, but scientists generally talk about crossing two key regions. First, the termination shock, which is where the solar wind, the stream of charged particles from the sun, abruptly slows down as it starts hitting the interstellar medium. Both probes crossed that years ago.
Okay. And the final boundary?
That's generally considered the heliopause. This is the theoretical edge, where the outward pressure of the solar wind is effectively balanced by the inward pressure of the interstellar medium, the gas and dust between the stars. Voyager 1 was the first human-made object to cross the heliopause and enter interstellar space, officially recorded on August 25, 2012.
An absolutely unprecedented moment in human history. The first time something we built reached the space between the stars.
A profound threshold to cross.
Yeah.
And Voyager 2, on its different trajectory, followed its sibling into interstellar space on November 5, 2018. So they are the only spacecraft ever built by humans that are currently operating in that vast, cold, radioactive region we call interstellar space.
Just incredible. What kind of staggering distances are we talking about now here in late 2025? Where are they?
Voyager 1, the faster one, is currently approximately 169.6 astronomical units, or AU, away from Earth.
And an AU is the distance from the Earth to the Sun, so 169 times that distance.
Exactly. To put that in more familiar terms, that's about 15.7 billion miles, or roughly 25.3 billion kilometers.
Mind-boggling. How long does it take for a signal to even reach it?
The time it takes for a radio signal, traveling at the speed of light, to reach Voyager 1 is now about 23.5 hours, one way.
Almost a full day just for light to get there.
And another day for any reply to come back. Voyager 2 is a bit closer, but still well out there in interstellar space at approximately 141.2 AU, or about 13.1 billion miles away. They are truly drifting into the cosmic ocean now, powered only by their decaying plutonium thermoelectric generators.
And their trajectory.
Right.
They're just drifting, right? They're not aimed at any specific star system?
No, they're not aimed in the sense of having a target lock and a guidance system. They're simply following the trajectory that resulted from their planetary flybys decades ago, influenced now only by the sun's distant gravity and the subtle pull of the galaxy itself. They're coasting.
Do we have any predictions about where they might eventually end up or pass near?
We do have calculations. Voyager 1's first predicted close-ish approach to another star system is projected to be about 40,000 years from now.
40,000 years.
Yeah. It's expected to pass within about 1.6 light years of a star called Gliese 445, which is in the constellation Camelopardalis. Not exactly a close encounter in interstellar terms, but it's the first notable milestone. Voyager 2 has a different path, heading towards Sirius eventually, but again, over immense timescales.
40,000 years. If the record itself manages to survive that long, intact, it will finally be getting somewhat closer to another star system where it might infinitesimally possibly be intercepted. And that brings us back full circle, really, to the curatorial philosophy behind the content, particularly the omissions.
Right.
Knowing that this record is meant to speak for us over these staggering time frames, the committee, led by Sagan, made a very conscious decision to show humanity primarily in its most loving, positive light.
Yes, they quite intentionally excluded graphic images or sounds depicting war, violence, disease, crime, or extreme poverty and inequality. This wasn't intended to be an objective, warts-and-all, balanced history textbook of 20th century Earth.
So what was the reasoning? They weren't trying to actively deceive the universe about our flaws, were they?
I don't think deception was the goal. It was presented more as an act of aspiration, a statement of values.
Defining humanity by its potential rather than its complete reality.
Exactly that. They seem to be defining us by our best self, our capacity for wonder and science, our ability to create profound and beautiful music and art, our capacity for deep connection and love, like the EEG, and our ability, at least sometimes, to cooperate globally, which the initial UN greeting represented. It was a statement of what we value most about ourselves and what we hope to become or be remembered for. A definition of humanity by its noblest achievements and aspirations, not its failures.
That's a powerful way to frame it. And this aspirational view, this focus on hope, ties directly back to that really profound observation made by one of the project advisors, B.M. Oliver, who recognized the crucial dual audience of the record from the start.
Right. Bernard Oliver, who was a brilliant engineer and thinker involved with SETI, he stated quite bluntly that while the chance of the record ever being found by an actual extraterrestrial intelligence is statistically infinitesimal, almost zero, it will certainly be seen by billions of terrestrials.
Meaning us, here on Earth, through documentation, replicas, the story itself.
Exactly. So the primary guaranteed function of this incredibly complex, expensive, and ambitious artifact wasn't really outward communication, but inward reflection.
Its real function, as Oliver put it.
Its real function, he concluded, is ultimately to appeal to and perhaps expand the human spirit. The entire exercise of curation, the sheer necessity of having to sit down and try to summarize all of our culture, all of our being, in just 6 weeks, what did that really achieve? It forced a small group of humans acting as proxies for all of us to grapple with that ultimate question. If you had to choose just one artifact, one message, to represent our entire species for 1 billion years, what would it be? What truly defines us?
The selection process itself was the payoff, forcing us to confront and prioritize our own values.
Precisely. And their answer, the Golden Record itself, became this monumental manifesto. It asserted that the high art of Bach and the raw energy of Chuck Berry, the complex technical language of DNA, and the profound philosophical power of the pulsar map, the intricate diversity of 55 human languages, and the stunning intimacy of Anne Drillion's brainwaves thinking about love, that all of these elements, together, are essential parts of what we are. They risked everything, reputation, scientific accuracy, political backlash, to tell that full, complex, diverse, and ultimately deeply aspirational story about humanity.
Well, this deep dive has certainly explored a project of almost maximal cultural and scientific complexity, hasn't it? Conceived and executed under truly impossible time constraints.
It really is an astonishing story.
We've seen how they moved from defining the absolute universal constant of the hydrogen atom's transition to using that to define the rotational speed of a record player, to encoding images line by line, right through to defining the most intimate sound of human love via brainwaves. It's just a remarkable tribute to human ingenuity, collaboration, and sheer nerve.
What resonates most with me about the Golden Record, thinking about it now, is its unwavering, almost defiant hope, especially given the global anxiety, the Cold War dread of the era in which it was born.
Yeah.
It is, as you said earlier, a kind of cosmic love letter, but maybe it's also a manifesto of our potential for survival, for endurance. It seems to assert that our greatest achievements are relentless curiosity that drives science, our capacity for creating beauty in art and music, our profound drive for knowledge, and maybe above all, our ability to feel and articulate love and connection, that these are the things that ultimately make us worthy of existence and perhaps even capable of enduring across cosmic timescales. It's fundamentally optimistic.
It truly is. And that brings us to the provocative closing thought we like to leave you with, building on that idea that the record's primary audience really remains ourselves here on Earth. The Golden Record is a snapshot, a reflection of who we thought we were, or perhaps who we aspired to be back in 1977. It showcases our hopes and our best attempts at self-definition from that specific moment in time. So here's the question for you to ponder. If NASA or some global body assembled that same kind of committee today, gave them that same impossible 6-week deadline here in 2025, and tasked them with updating the playlist, creating a Golden Record 2.0 to capture the current state of the human spirit, our knowledge, our challenges, our hopes now, what song, literally or metaphorically, would we absolutely have to add to the mix right now?
That's a tough one.
What new piece of science or art or music or perhaps social reality would we risk everything to include today to define the civilization we are currently curating, not just for the next billion years in space, but for ourselves, right here, right now? What story would we tell the cosmos and ourselves today?